It's a random Tuesday, I get to be outside, and it's actually snowing! We've got actual snow! And today I'm listening to this newest record by The Vaccines, a pickup full of pink carnations. The Vaccines are an English four-piece rock band, and Pickup Full of Pink Carnations is their sixth full-length record. The Vaccines emerged from the kind of very late years of that sort of garage rock revival movement of the 2000s, and of the very large stable of bands from that movement, that kind of genre, they always seemed like a very safe bet to me, with a really consistent output over the first decade of their career that, you know, scratched that certain itch for very melodious, sort of plain indie rock that you could just bellow along to at concerts, clubs, house parties, car journeys, whatever the setting, whatever the weather. But on the band's last full-length record, Back in Love City, they definitely decided to expand their ambitions a little bit, bringing in a lot of new sounds and ideas, but they ultimately fell far short of what I usually expect from the Vaccines. The album felt like a real clash of ideas, bringing together so many disparate sounds. You had arena-ready hard rock riffs sitting alongside kind of thumping club dance beats. You had what seemed like a bunch of sort of old classic western motifs sitting alongside very digital, glitzy synth lines. Across these 13 tracks, the band just seemed to pull in so many different directions, doing way too much at once. And yet at the same time, on the lyrical front, the record really didn't do enough. You know, right from the start, it felt like we maybe were being introduced to something that could be a little more conceptual. We have this place, this kind of location, Love City, where maybe you expect, you know, some kind of story's going to take place, we're going to have some characters or something. There's going to be something to it, but by the end, it definitely felt to me like Love City was just an album title and nothing much else. And the production and the mixing on this record really didn't help matters. You know, putting this admittedly eclectic mix of sounds through layers of reverb and compression in some kind of attempt to meld all of these odd textures together, it really kind of strained the whole thing into some kind of greyish nut milk that personally I wouldn't even put in my tea. And this seemed to make a real hash of, you know, the few kind of decent songwriting ideas that did show up on the record. And the band's following EP, Planet of the Youth, really wasn't much better, suffering from a lot of the same issues. Obviously, I don't want to harp on previous releases too much, but I think it is just worth noting how much these last couple of releases from the band really dented my faith in them. So you can certainly imagine that I was glad when, in the run-up to this newest record, it definitely seemed like the band were taking more of a back-to-basics sort of approach. You know, from the singles to the artwork that didn't feature any neon pink animated love hearts, even the promotional material. I mean, this is literally just the band standing in a wooden box. It actually could not get any simpler. And I do think that this album meets those expectations fairly well. Across a short runtime, the band delivers 10 indie rock tunes of varying quality, but that invariably do sound like the Vaccines, which I think, for me, is just fairly comforting after such a departure on their last record. Immediately, it does feel like this album is looking backward. The record actually opens with the sound of record static before giving way to these lovely guitar arpeggios that have this sense of nostalgic longing for past events, past sounds, past memories. The song is Sometimes I Swear, which builds to a chorus that really yearns to be belted out as loud as it possibly could be. Justin Young, the lead singer of this band, is able to provide that sort of catharsis, cutting through this very full mix with a really big, weighty, reverberant vocal as he sings about a lack of belonging, a sort of floating freely out and away from perhaps the past, perhaps its strong sense of place and purpose and not being able to get it back. This opener, particularly the hook, is definitely simple and plain, perhaps all too familiar for the genre. I think it could fairly be criticised as a little underwritten and maybe a little repetitive, but it also sees the band satisfying that itch that they proved themselves to be so adept at on their first 4 records, and that's really great to hear. And the record is able to continue in this vein for a number of tracks, delivering the really head-bopping lead single Heartbreak Kid, which definitely has grown on me a ton since it was first released, and then the feverishly catchy Lunar Eclipse, which certainly does crib its kind of style of sun-bleached rhythmic guitars from a band like The Strokes, but it does it so excellently that I honestly couldn't care less. The warping guitar solo towards the end is a really nice touch for what I think is probably one of the driest songs on the record. I think the production on this one is particularly kind of clean and crisp, which definitely does make it stand out from some of the other songs on this record, although we'll get to that in a moment. And the lyrics also really stand out here, with a kind of handful of half humorous, half dejected one-liners that definitely come together to form more than the sum of their parts. You know, I can't exactly pin down an exact subject or meaning on this one, but the lyrics just definitely do provide a very satisfying sense of personality and character when combined with Young's subtly wry delivery. I think we actually do get lyrical highlights all over this record, from the self-deprecating Primitive Man to the cerebral rocker, The Dreamer, and then again on Sunkissed, which for me sort of tells this classic tale of, you know, a magical honeymoon phase of a romance, but a romance that really just couldn't last a season, or maybe couldn't survive contact with long-term reality. I mean, on the chorus of this one, the evocative imagery, it just cascades down on every single line to the point where it's actually kind of hard to take it all in and appreciate it all as the song is actually playing. Meanwhile, I think the line that first really stood out to me, that I kind of just threw away as some kind of quirky one-liner, where Young reminisces about growing his beard to look like Dennis Wilson, it seems to take on further meaning as you think about it more, this early blossoming relationship where everything is really passionate and intense and magical, but also can be kind of fake and short-lived, definitely seems to link into this fantasy that you could be Dennis Wilson just because of some facial hair. And with its very bright chorusy guitars and additions of little bits of vibraphone too, this also manages to be one of the most unique sounding tracks on this album, while still definitely sounding like the Vaccines. I will say I wasn't sure about the mixing of the vocals on the chorus here at first. You know, they sound sort of echoey and far away, very reverb heavy, but after a number of listens and definitely just growing to appreciate this song, I did start to like the idea that this is kind of a distant voice calling from the past, fighting its way through the mix like some kind of, you know, painful, unwanted memory of this relationship gone by. You know, you can rationalize anything when you like the song. But it was definitely harder for me to forgive on some of the lesser tracks here, when this kind of vocal mix did just keep cropping up on every other hook at least. And by the time I got to the closer on this record, I was typically just thinking, this again? You know, I'm not exactly a production or a mixing nut, but, you know, I can definitely hear this sort of distinct style of vocal mix over and over again on the hooks on this record. And it sort of starts to feel like a bit of a failure of imagination, especially since, you know, you can imagine the potential, you know, for a bit of a change up sonically or production wise. And, you know, I think that might have elevated a few of the lesser tracks here. Yeah, I didn't care so much for the closer. I didn't exactly love Love to Walk Away. And Last Man Standing, I think, also particularly has this problem of a kind of underwritten chorus that lacks immediacy. It's kind of boring, also full of cliche. And when the glitzy synth line comes in, it starts to sound like a mediocre Killers song from an even more mediocre Killers record. So overall, this record does have its flaws, but, you know, some of those flaws are ones that the Vaccines have basically had for their whole career. I'm glad that they're back to their old selves. And while I don't think this will blow you away at all, I think if you like this kind of thing, it's a pretty positive way to start the year.
But now the days grow short. I'm in the autumn.
February is the start of the year. Okay.